On July 13, 2008, a man signed one piece of paper. His name was August Busch IV, and with his signature, 156 years of family history ended in about the time it takes to read this sentence. Anheuser-Busch, the company behind Budweiser, the self-proclaimed king of beers, stopped being American that day. It was sold to a foreign company for close to $52 billion. Here's the part almost nobody knows. The Busch family, the family whose name was on every single bottle, controlled somewhere around 4% of the company they were selling. 4% of a $52 billion empire after 6 generations. So how does a dynasty this rich, this famous, this deeply woven into American culture lose the thing with their own name stamped on the label? Stick around, because the answer isn't bad luck. It's a decision this family made quietly, over and over, for 100 years, without ever seeing where it was leading. The rise. To understand how this kingdom slipped away, you have to go back to the man who built it. And strangely enough, he wasn't a brewer at all. Adolphus Busch arrived in St. Louis from Germany around 1857. He was reportedly one of over 20 children, carrying a modest inheritance, and by most accounts, no burning ambition to make beer. What he did have was a head for business. He started out in the brewing supply trade, selling the equipment and ingredients breweries needed, which is how he crossed paths with a soap manufacturer named Eberhard Anheuser. Anheuser had taken over a struggling St. Louis brewery, reportedly as repayment for a bad debt. The story goes that the beer coming out of it was so poor that saloons were said to pour it right back over the bar. In 1861, Adolphus married Eberhard's daughter and married himself straight into the family business. Here's what made Adolphus different from every other brewer of his era. He didn't think like a brewer. He thought like a builder of national systems. In the 1870s, he traveled through Europe studying how the great lager towns worked, and by 1876, using a recipe developed with a friend, he launched a beer named after a brewing town in Bohemia. He called it Budweiser. The beer itself wasn't the innovation. The innovation was that it traveled. Every other American brewer at the time made beer for their own city, because beer spoiled fast and couldn't survive a long haul. Adolphus wanted Budweiser in every city in the country, so he built the infrastructure to make that possible. Pasteurization to keep the beer stable for months, refrigerated rail cars to move it long distances, and a chain of icehouses strung along the rail lines from coast to coast. While his competitors were still fighting over single towns, Adolphus was quietly wiring an entire nation to drink his beer. He was also, by most accounts, one of the sharpest marketers of his generation, handing out branded keepsakes, plastering saloons with free artwork so his name sat in front of drinkers all day. By around 1901, Anheuser-Busch had overtaken its rivals to become the largest brewery in the country. Budweiser had earned the nickname it still carries, the King of Beers. Adolphus lived like the king he'd built. Mansions, legendary parties, a fortune that put him among the wealthiest men in America. When he died in 1913, he left behind a company sitting at the very top of its industry. And then, almost immediately, that company ran headfirst into a threat designed to kill it completely. The monument's survival as a status symbol. Prohibition hit in 1920, and it was built to be a death sentence for companies exactly like this one. Overnight, the single product that generated nearly all of Anheuser-Busch's revenue became illegal to sell. Breweries across the country locked their doors for good. Some of the most respected names in American beer disappeared in those years and never came back. Under Adolphus's son, August Busch Sr., the family refused to fold. Instead, they found the loopholes sitting in the fine print of the law. Selling beer was illegal. Selling the ingredients and equipment for making things near beer was not. So the company diversified into everything adjacent to brewing. It sold brewers' yeast, which reportedly became a genuine goldmine as Americans baked at home during hard times. It sold malt syrup marketed for baking, though plenty of customers clearly had other uses in mind, and the company was in no hurry to ask questions. There was ice cream under the Busch name, refrigerated truck bodies built in the old brewery plants, and a low-alcohol near beer that sold by the millions of cases. None of it made anywhere near the money real Budweiser once did, but it kept the lights on and the family in control until Prohibition ended in 1933, at which point Anheuser-Busch was one of the few major brewers still standing to pour the moment beer was legal again, while its dead competitors watched from the sidelines. That survival set up the company's golden era under a man everyone called Gussie, August Busch Jr. Gussie took the reins in the mid-1940s, and he understood something his father never fully grasped. Beer wasn't a product, it was a feeling. He's the man credited with turning the Budweiser Clydesdales into a national symbol. He bought the St. Louis Cardinals in 1953 and put the Anheuser-Busch name on the ballpark. He pushed the company into theme parks so families could spend an entire day inside the brand. By the late 1950s, Anheuser-Busch wasn't just the largest brewery in America, it was the largest brewery on the planet. This is the peak. A family business still run by the family, dominating a global industry with its product woven into baseball, into Christmas, into the 4th of July. And it's right here, at the absolute summit, that the family did something that would echo all the way to the ending. They turned each other. In 1975, Gussie, the man who built the modern empire and ran it for roughly 3 decades, was pushed out of his own boardroom by his own son, August Busch III. Cold and disciplined where his father was warm and theatrical, the third convinced the board that the old showman had lost his touch and stripped him of control. Gussie reportedly learned he'd been dethroned from inside the very company his family had built. Remember that moment, father, because it comes back at the worst possible time. The mechanism, the principle underneath it all. August Busch III ran the company for the next quarter century with an iron grip, and by most measures he was brilliant at it. Under him, Anheuser-Busch's share of the American beer market climbed toward roughly half of every beer sold in the country. Bud Light launched and became the best-selling beer in America. The marketing machine gave the country decades of unforgettable ad campaigns. At its peak, the company was brewing over 100 million barrels a year and owned the American beer aisle the way almost no company has ever owned a category. But the third also did the one thing that would eventually doom the family's control. To fuel all that growth, he leaned harder and harder on the public markets, issuing more shares year after year, until Anheuser-Busch was a sprawling public corporation with an outside board, and the family's slice of the pie kept shrinking with every offering. Here's the mechanism, and it's worth slowing down on, because it's the whole story. Every time a public company sells new shares to raise money, it's trading a piece of control for a pile of cash. Do that once, it's a rounding error. Do that across 6 generations, while the family itself keeps splitting into more heirs, while estate taxes force even more shares onto the open market with every death. while some descendants simply cash out for a comfortable life instead of holding on, and the arithmetic turns merciless. Think of it like a pizza cut for one person that gets recut every time a new sibling, cousin or stranger wants a slice. The pizza get bigger. It just gets divided more times. Eventually, the founder's descendants are holding a sliver so thin, it doesn't matter how loudly their name is printed on the box. That's exactly what happened here. The name got more famous with every decade. The ownership got smaller. By the time August Busch IV took over as CEO in 2006, the company was arguably the most efficient brewer in America, and also one of the most exposed. The stock had gone flat. The family's stake was a fraction of a fraction, and across the ocean, a hungry, cost-cutting giant had started circling. The fall. So how do you actually lose a $52 billion company? Not in a single crash, in layers, one factor stacking on the next. Layer 1, timing. The takeover offer landed in the summer of 2008, just as the entire global financial system was catching fire. Markets were collapsing, credit was freezing, and stock prices across corporate America were falling through the floor. Into that panic walked InBev, the Belgian-Brazilian brewing giant, with an all-cash offer, reportedly around $70 a share, no stock, no promises, just cash on the table at the exact moment terrified shareholders wanted cash more than anything else. The financial crisis didn't cause the sale. It greased the wheels. Layer 2, the old family fracture, reopening at the worst possible time. By 2008, the two most powerful Bushes in the company were, once again, a hard-edged father and a son who didn't fully trust him. August Busch III on the board, August Busch IV in the CEO chair. They weren't close. When the offer arrived, they didn't stand as one unified wall, the way a founding family needs to in a crisis like this. The same fault line that split Gussie from his son in 1975 was still running straight through the family in 2008. Layer 3, a smart defense that came apart. The fourth understood the trap he was in. If the company became too large and too entangled to swallow, no one could take it over. So Anheuser-Busch moved to buy out the remaining half of Grupo Modelo, the Mexican brewer behind Corona, which it already partly owned. The idea was to make the company so big and so complicated that InBev couldn't afford to reach for it. The deal couldn't be completed in time. And in a bitter twist, when InBev bought Anheuser-Busch anyway, it inherited that same stake in Modelo, and a few years later simply bought the rest for itself. The defense meant to save the family ended up handing its buyer an even bigger prize. Layer 4, the legal reality of a public company. You might be shouting at the screen right now, why didn't the family just say no? Because by 2008, this wasn't their private company to protect. It was a public company, and the board's legal duty was to the shareholders, not to the family name. When InBev raised its offer, it landed at a premium the board couldn't legally walk away from without breaching its duty to every investor who owned a piece. Reportedly, just months before the sale, the fourth had told the company's distributors that Anheuser-Busch would never be sold while he was in charge. He signed the deal roughly 3 months later because the power to keep that promise was never actually his to give. And underneath all 4 layers, the real cause, the Bushes simply didn't own enough of their own company to stop any of it. 100 years of stock sales, inheritances, estate taxes, and heirs cashing out had left the founding family holding around 4% of the business, with the aging patriarch himself sitting at just over 1%. 4% gets you no vote that matters. 4% cannot block a sale, that thousands of other shareholders are lining up to accept. They didn't lose Anheuser-Busch in 2008. They lost it in slow motion over a century, and 2008 was simply the day the bill finally came due. To be clear, the Bushes didn't walk away poor. They cashed out their shares for real money and remained wealthy people, with the mansions, the horses, and the name intact. What they lost wasn't their fortune. It was company, their command. The thing 6 generations had actually built with their own hands. What came next only underlined the loss. The new owners moved quickly to cut costs. Thousands of jobs disappeared in the following months, many of them in St. Louis, the city that had been the company's home for well over 100 years. There's one detail that captures just how strange the moment felt. Warren Buffett, the company's second largest shareholder at the time, reportedly sold off his entire stake that summer, betting the deal would collapse. He later admitted it was a mistake. If one of the sharpest investors in the world bet against this sale and lost, a family holding roughly 4% was never going to be the one to stop it. The name stayed on the buildings. Almost everything behind the name changed. The traced. To really see the size of what the Busch family gave away, you only need to look a few hundred miles east, to a family that faced every one of the same temptations for even longer, and chose the opposite path every single time. In the small town of Pottsville, Pennsylvania, there's a brewery called Yuengling, founded around 1829. Older than Anheuser-Busch, older than the Clydesdales. It's widely recognized as the oldest operating brewery in the United States. It survived Prohibition the exact same scrappy way the Bushes did, leaning on near beer and dairy products to stay alive. It survived every price war and buyout wave that wiped out brewer after brewer through the 20th century. But across roughly 2 centuries, Yuengling held on to one thing the Bushes let slip away. It never went public. Not a single share sold to outside investors. The man who ran it for decades, Dick Yuengling, made a defining choice back in the 1980s. When his turn came to take control, he bought the entire company outright from his own father, and over the following years, bought out his other relatives too, so ownership wouldn't scatter across dozens of cousins the way it eventually did for the Bushes. He paid real money out of his own pocket to keep control concentrated instead of letting it divide. Because there isn't a single public share of Yuengling in existence, there's no hostile offer any foreign conglomerate can ever put on the table that the family is legally required to consider. No outside board. No shareholders demanding a premium. No 4% problem. Just one family still holding the entire wheel. Today, the company is reportedly being handed down to a new generation of family members, and Yuengling stands as the largest American-owned brewery in the country, for the exact reason Anheuser-Busch fell. It never gave the store away. You could add a second, quieter example here too. Plenty of family-run breweries and beverage companies across the world have taken minority outside investment specifically without giving up voting control, structuring separate classes of shares, so the founding family keeps the final say no matter how much capital comes in from outside. It's the same lesson wearing a different hat. You can bring in outside money without handing over the keys if you build the structure early enough. Here's the takeaway, and it has almost nothing to do with beer. The Bushes outbrewed, outsold, and outmarketed every rival they ever faced. They built the single largest brewery on earth, and none of it saved them, because they gave away the one thing that was ever actually theirs to keep, which was control. A name on the bottle is not ownership. A fortune is not control. You can win every quarter for 100 years and still lose everything on the one day that actually counts, if you've spent a century quietly handing away the votes that decide who's in charge. The callback. So the next time those Clydesdales come stamping across your television screen at Christmas, remember what they're really selling you underneath the sentiment. They're selling the memory of a family that once had everything and kept none of the part that mattered, because they never fully grasped that the empire was never the beer. The empire was the control, and a person or a family can lose that so slowly, so quietly, that they never once feel it leaving their hands until the day it's already gone. The Fanger. There's another American dynasty that made this exact same mistake, but on a scale that makes the Busch family's 4% look almost modest. A family that, at one point, controlled who counted in this entire country, and then watched their fortune disappear without a single stock market crash to blame it on. That story is coming up next.